Hello and welcome to the Azure Cloud Chronicles. Today we're going to be talking about Azure data again, and we're going to be specifically talking about Azure SQL Managed Instance. And we have this labeled Part 1. It's going to be Part 1 of 2. I'm Joey D'Antoni. I'm a Microsoft Data Platform MVP as well as an Azure MVP, and I'm Principal Cloud Architect at 3Cloud. And John?
Hi, I'm John Morehouse. I'm a principal consultant with D'Antoni and Associates. I also am a data platform MVP. I am not an Azure MVP, so data platform is the one for me.
So if you saw our last episode, we talked to Bob Ward, and one of the things we talked about was the differentiations between some of the Azure SQL Database platforms. And SQL Database was the first platform, like Bob mentioned. It's been around since 2011, but there are a number of differences between Azure SQL Database and SQL Server in general, but I think I want to focus on two really important ones. One is that you can't do cross-database queries in an Azure SQL Database, and the other one is that you can't restore a database to Azure SQL Database. These two things greatly limit the number of apps that can be migrated to it.
If only we could restore.
We keep asking for restore. Yes. It restores the big one. Cross database queries you might be able to work out, but it typically takes a bunch of code changes, and nobody wants to do code changes in their applications. But yeah, I had this discussion with Steve Jones a while back that he thinks SQL Server never should have allowed cross database queries, and I think he's probably right.
Well, it would have made it easier.
Yeah. So if you're not familiar with cross-database queries, it's when you do like four-part naming and you do a four-part name and hit that. But yeah, those are the big limitations. So around 2015, 2016, Microsoft started working on this alternative offering because they wanted to have a PaaS solution that people could more easily migrate to. And as Bob said, this platform was originally Cloud Lifter. Lindsay Allen was kind of the PM who was responsible for it. And I find a lot of faults with managed instance, but I really like the concept. The concept was really good. It was going to be just a managed SQL database, SQL Server offering in the cloud, and it was a little different in that it only supported what was known at the time Azure AD authentication, but you could restore a database there. When it was built, you could log ship to it. They have since disabled restore with no recovery, which is a little bit frustrating, but there are some workarounds, which we'll talk about in a couple of minutes. And in general, it's a similar architecture to Azure SQL Database. The underlying architecture is a little bit different, but like the high availability and everything's the same. Anything else you want to cover there?
No, really, what I tell people is it was that answer to sit between Azure SQL Database and like SQL Server on a virtual machine, right?
Yeah.
Because Azure SQL Database had some limitations, it's really that middle tier answer that Microsoft came up with. And I know you've got some issues with it, but I think for as long as you're not stressing it entirely, smaller workloads, it does what it needs to do.
My line, and this sounds kind of sarcastic, and it partially is sarcastic, but I think it's also accurate. If you don't care about your database, managed instance is a really good solution to use. Like if it's a database you just kind of had, or an instance you just kind of had, and you never really think about it, but you have to worry about taking backups and keeping it online and stuff, it's a really good use case. The main takeaway I kind of want folks to have, and Microsoft will probably slap me for saying this, is don't build your mission critical app around managed instance. Also, don't build your mission critical app around SQL Server on RDS. If you're doing that, you probably want to build it either around SQL DB if you're building it from scratch and you can build it to use SQL DB, or SQL on VMs, because you just have a lot more control and granularity. The big thing for those kinds of apps, that is the takeaway, is you give up some level of control in the cost of either storage performance or storage growth. And we'll talk about this more in detail later, but it's a cost thing, right? So if your data volume goes up, your costs go up like exponentially beyond a certain point, and that's really where the catch is to kind of all these solutions. And RDS has a lot of the same costing problems too. It's not just things that managed instance didn't do correctly. It's kind of the nature of platform as a service databases. So John, how would you migrate a customer into managed instance?
Great question. It depends on one, how much downtime they can withstand, how big their data volume is. My first go-to is actually a flavor of log shipping called Log Replay, which is a service that Microsoft offers that we can. It's a log shipping like service where we can essentially put backups into a blob storage, and then the service will actually do a no recovery restore to the managed instance. There are some limitations around that, but it's a clean way to do it if we need to minimize downtime. If a customer has a bigger migration window, then a good old-fashioned backup and restore.
Yeah, you can do something with like distributed availability groups too, right? Can't you?
Yeah, you can do MI-Link.
MI-Link, yeah.
Managed instance link where you could do that.
Yeah, the only
Even
caveat,
that's got some limitations.
Yeah. I've had a customer trying to use it actually to get off of MI back into a VM, and it used to only be one database, but it supports more than one database now. But they've hit a lot of thread limitations, which is the same idea as you have in AGs, where if you don't have enough CPUs and you have busy databases, it's going to flop. But yeah, that's been their issue. Unfortunately, like, I think most of their databases are small, so they'll be able to do backup restore on those and just use the AG for the couple of big ones.
I love backup and restore. Hey, if I don't have to touch my primary production box in terms of like setting up MI-Link or anything like that, I love those migrations where I don't have to touch production and just use backups.
If you're not a DBA or you're a new DBA and you don't really understand why we like backup and restore so much, let me explain. With Azure SQL DB, any migration can only be done using an export-import process. An export-import process, effectively, it's a little bit different than this, but not much, takes the DDL for all of your tables, then creates them, then generates a series of insert statements and ingests all the data that way. The reason why we don't like that and why it doesn't scale is that all has to touch the transaction log and go through the internals of the database. All those things are expensive. A database backup and restore is effectively an OS file copy operation. So it's happening at the OS and it's just writing the data file somewhere to some storage layer. We'll talk about what that means in MI here in a minute, but it's just much faster because you're not going through all those internals of the database. You're just basically doing an OS copy of the file. So that's kind of why we're so enamored with using backup and restore.
And again, I don't have to touch production.
Yeah, and
other than taking a backup.
Yeah. Once you have the backup, it's you're good to go.
Yep.
What are the tiers of MI and what's the differences kind of between them?
Great question. The tiers are somewhat comparable to what you see in Azure SQL Database, right? Except for they don't have a DTU. But they do have a general purpose, and the general purpose allows for network attached storage. You still get pretty good latency numbers on the storage itself. You can have a large number of cores and memory to go with that. They also have a business critical tier, which is, of course, if you need super fast latency numbers on the storage, you get locally attached SSDs, solid state drives, not the other kind of SSDs. And so they do have those other tiers. They do have a new next-gen tier that is what I would say sits between general purpose and MI. Business critical. In that next-gen tier, they actually changed the storage underneath the hood, so you have better control, better granular control over things like IOPS and bandwidth and throughput and that type of stuff. Whereas like the general purpose, you're kind of limited to what size disk you get when you do a restore, which if you're not familiar, the managed disks have certain performance characteristics, and if you restore a small database, you're going to get a small disk, and along with that disk, you get pretty crappy performance.
Well, it's not managed disk actually. It's page files and blobs.
Oh, it's page files and blobs. Yep.
Yeah, it's same concept as managed disk. Let me share. I have a slide with the network architecture. And we can kind of talk through that because that covers a lot of, and then we have another slide with the physical architecture. One of the things that's kind of different, sorry about that. One of the things that's kind of different about MI as opposed to DB is, and Microsoft is slightly moving away from this in DB, but generally speaking, when you deploy a database, a SQL database, it's on the internet. So you reach it over its public IP address. You have to do stuff to make it privately available. With MI, inherently, when you deploy it, it deploys within a VNet and within its own subnet, which is, I think, called managed instance. If I remember correctly, you have to have a subnet called managed instance.
You do.
Yeah, to deploy into.
Yep.
So you do need to know a little bit about networking, and this is kind of an interesting design. Don't do this network design, by the way. This was taken from docs, but this is not a good network design. You would not want to have your gateway in the same VNet as your app and your database. That's a bad design. You would typically want that gateway to be in a hub network, and then have this database network off to the side. Putting the client app in the managed instance in the subnet aren't as bad of an idea, but this just kind of shows that inherently this is a private connection, and it's not something we're exposing publicly. And then within that VNet, there's a virtual cluster. You don't really manage all that. Microsoft manages that for you, but you do have to have connectivity architecture. So one of the things that I know a lot of MVPs that are database-centric people ran into is like, I deployed this MI, now I can't connect to it. Yeah, build a VM in the same network and you can connect to it.
Or open it up to public, which
is
your choice.
But yeah, actually opening up to public is a pain.
It is.
It's really not designed for that, and that's why it's a little bit more secure. The other aspect of this I wanted to talk to you is managed instance by default uses Intra for security. So just like Azure SQL DB, you can connect using Intra, or you can use SQL Auth as well, which is probably not recommended. There's also a way, and I haven't seen anybody actually do this, but I do know one of the years I was working the SQL booth at Ignite, we got a ton of questions about it, was you can still use Kerberos Auth for this. It involves setting up, you have to set up, I think, Azure Directory Domain Services and link it to your on-prem AD. It's not easy to do, and it's not something I've seen done. But you do have the option of authenticating using Kerberos. This ties back into what John was saying about storage in the two tiers. And this is from SQL DB, so I think some of this is a little bit different, at least in terms of the connectivity architecture you see there at the top with those control rings. But effectively, a general purpose MI or SQL database has one copy of compute running on a single VM and multiple copies of storage, and those live in page storage, like John said. So the size of your database is, in general purpose, next gen is tied to the size of your database. There's an old SQL Cat blog post that details this in great detail. But if you just restored your database and you have an MI general purpose and you wonder why the performance sucks, that's why.
Yep.
It should be better documented, and it's not. The business critical one is very different architecture. The size of your database has no bearing on the IOPS. That's the local flash drive on all those machines. And you see there are 4 databases or 4 nodes in that AG. It's typically going to be 3. But Microsoft will expand a 4th node. You don't really have any visibility into that other than you can connect to a secondary.
Via read intent, right?
Yeah. Just like you would on-prem.
Right. Yep.
Yeah, and don't try that at home because you need a lot of coordination. But it's really cool to be able to use those local ephemeral drives to get speed. One of the other things that I think is a challenge is TempDB here. You want to talk about that and why it's a little bit harder than in DB?
Well, yeah, you have.
But yeah,
why it's harder in where?
In MI, just because of the multiple database scenario.
Yeah, I mean, we have limited control over how we can configure TempDB. Of course, we have more control in MI than we do Azure SQL Database. But that can cause issues on your workloads because we're limited to what we can do with it. So we have run into issues where clients have been on MI and they have a TempDB centric workload, and that causes issues, performance issues. And so we have to find ways to mitigate that in some fashion.
Yeah. You can add TempDB files onto your storage, so you can grow TempDB, but remember that comes at the cost of cutting the capacity or potentially increasing your storage capacity, which your storage capacity is tied to your core count, so that can also increase your cost. So that's really the big, and I will absolutely say RDS has this exact same problem. And the reason why it's less of a problem in database is the entire workload in a SQL database is designed around a single database architecture. So in theory, based on your QoS, Microsoft has allocated you enough TempDB space and IOPS in SQL database. And I've only seen it be a problem once or twice, and it was a really like poorly written query with bad stats or something where TempDB came into play. I've seen TempDB come into play a lot on both RDS and Managed Instance, just because it's multiple databases and you have the potential. It's easier to push the workload a lot higher than it should be, I think is a good way of describing that. John, do you want to talk a little bit about DR2? I don't really have that covered on the slide, but I think you can probably explain how.
Well, I did want to point out, one of the things I do like about MI is just the same as Azure SQL Database is that we get high availability right out of the box, right? So you and I are both, we're old, but we've been around the block, and I remember back the days of trying to stand up high availability was kind of a pain in the butt back in the day. So I like that MI's we get that HA right out of the box. DR wise, obviously it's just like Azure SQL Database. We get backups. We get 7 days of backups out of the gate for point-in-time recovery. We can adjust that up to 35 days. We can get long-term retention. So if we need to take backups, the full backups, and store them for weeks, months, years, up to 10 years, we can do so. That's configurable. One of the other things I really like is the automatic failover groups or failover groups. Azure SQL Database. A couple clicks, you can have a DR copy in another region pretty easily. MI, you have the same kind of concept. It's a little bit harder to get put into place because of the whole networking. There's a DNS zone that you have to make sure is aligned, and there's some other networking components that you have to make sure is there to get that in place. Still easily doable within a day, right? But if you have to copy multiple terabytes and whatnot, it can be a pain in the butt. Interesting note is MI is one of the few things that you can't move to like another resource group or region. So you can't use Azure Resource Mover to actually move it. But
I mean, to be fair, there's 10 things you can move with Azure Resource Mover.
Well, that's true, but if you're moving to another subscription, you can move a number of things, but MI is not one of them, and that's because of the networking complexity, right? It lays out, but.
Yeah, you also can't move an Azure SQL database with a private link.
That would be true. Yes.
Yeah. I ran into that one last week. So I remember we were in this MVP meeting for Resource Mover, and John and I were like, "Well, what if you have a policy that requires tagging?" And it was like it was an NDA meeting, and it was the one where they were launching this new thing,
and we broke it.
And they're like, "Well, that wouldn't work," and we're like. Well, every enterprise customer has a policy that requires tagging. Oh, it was not. It was It was like we deflated their balloon rather quickly.
But DR wise, it's got DR capabilities, so we could fail over to another MI in a different region. One of the things it doesn't have is geo replication. So Azure SQL Database, we can geo replicate within the same region if we wanted to. If we wanted a different zone or what have you. We can't do that with MI. It has to be in a different region.
MI does support, I think now, zones, right?
I believe it's zone redundant. Yeah.
Yeah, it did not originally, but I'm pretty sure it supports zones now. So that's something to keep in mind. In general, that's the high level overview of the service. But let's kind of talk about some of the other caveats and things we've seen. I think performance is by far the biggest one I've seen, and really it comes down to that general purpose storage model being, I think, widely misunderstood. I don't think a lot of customers know that storage is inherently tied to the size of their database because it's such a weird performance is tied to the size of their database because it's such a weird concept, and nobody wants to go blow up the size of their database for seemingly, or a transaction log for seemingly no apparent reason, but that's kind of what you have to do. I'm trying to think of anything else I want to cover here. Oh, you let's talk about some of the benefits of using a PaaS service, because I think that's a good thing to talk about in general. John mentioned high availability. You get high availability out of the box. Backups are managed for you. OS updates and database updates are also managed for you. It is managed instance is a service that has this kind of weird option, because it's one of the only ones that I've seen have this in Azure anyway. You can lock in on a version of SQL Server, so you can say, I want to stay on 2022, or you can have it be more like SQL DB, where you're always getting the latest version of the code, which is like probably somewhere by... This varies by where Microsoft is in the release cycle on SQL Server, but it's usually like... So right now, SQL Server 25 is probably going to come out in the fall for GA. And so right now, you're probably actually behind the community tech preview builds of SQL 2025 on MI, but it varies, because sometimes they'll release a feature ahead where like they're really confident in the feature, but you have the option either stay locked into a version or kind of stay on the bleeding edge of new features, and that's something to keep in mind. So you do have that control. There are downtimes for updates though, and we've run into some problems with that with customers. What was the one you couldn't change anything? Remember
Yeah,
that?
we couldn't change anything because it was in the maintenance window and Microsoft was doing something,
Yeah.
and we couldn't
And
couldn't literally manage the MI.
by change anything, we couldn't even add a database to the
Right.
server. Yeah, and
Right. And it was stuck until
the update actually happened.
Yeah,
So basically
right.
what happened, if I'm remembering correctly, once the instance was flagged for an update, not that like the update was actually happening, like if they flagged it on a Tuesday or something, and
Yep.
the update window was Sunday, and we couldn't do anything from Tuesday to Sunday.
Yep. And then Sunday, when it entered the actual maintenance window, it did its thing, and then
Yeah.
it came out, and it was fine. But we
Yeah.
had to wait until that. Now, one of the things I do like about MI that I wish Azure SQL Database had was we can start and stop it. And so we can actually force it to stop. And so, like, I have customers that have an MI in non-production environments, and so I've scheduled it to stop, in terms of like maintenance or whatever to help save costs.
Yeah, and you can kind of do that with serverless, but like you were running into the other day, there's no
You
like
can't-
force stop button.
Yeah, like there's no, hey, I turned this thing off entirely and just charge me for storage.
Yeah.
Whereas with MI, I can say, stop this thing entirely, just charge me for storage, but I want this thing out there.
That was a relatively recent addition to the service.
was.
I do not think that was available in the early days.
It was not.
Yeah. Yeah, and the minimum, like I think John mentioned this earlier, the minimum you can buy is 4 core. There is this concept called instance pools where you can, it's not the same thing as elastic pools, but you can subdivide your managed instance. I think it supports 4 cores. I know it supports 8, but I think you can do like two core
I think
instances.
it supports 4, so you can do 2 and 2.
Yeah, but so if you see people talking about a 2 core MI, it's because they used instance pools and they split
Yep.
them up that way.
Yep.
By the way, if you're using instance pools and you look at your resource limits for MI in terms of IOPS, memory, CPU, it just halves all that stuff. So there's no like real magic there. John, did your MI start?
It did start. It is up and running.
You want to go ahead and share?
Sure. Let me move some windows around. And let me see if I can find the... Why can't I... Oh, here we go. Sorry.
No problem.
Oh, there we go. So I do have an MI. One of the things that they have done is when they first kind of released this, I remember when this first came out and we would go try to build one of these things, and 8 hours later, it was still building. Like, and we always used to joke that there was some poor intern running around with the SQL Server installer CD or DVD, trying, going to each machine to actually get it installed. They have sped this up. Now you can create one relatively quickly, depending on which configuration you go with. But I found it funny is because I actually had my MI scheduled to stop, and I told Joey this morning that I went and clicked the start button, and it took like 30 minutes for it to come online. We think it was because it was probably trying to find capacity in the East U.S. region, but typically it comes on relatively quickly. But Today it did not, but here I have an MI. I don't have any databases on it, but I keep this around for demo purposes so we can look around and play with it. You can see that my pricing tier is a general purpose Gen 5 4 core. I don't think that I have the next gen. Oh, I must be next gen.
Okay.
I didn't think that I was. I thought I had it disabled. Now, one of the cool things, next gen still preview. If you currently have a managed instance, you can actually move to the next gen, and the migration is seamless behind the scenes. It's literally just click the enabled button and click apply down here at the bottom. And then once you do that, you actually get a little bit more granular flexibility in like storage and IOPS and what have you. So you can fine tune that for your workloads. But
Next Gen has been one of those features that's been in preview since
forever. I thought it was going to be out by like early summer, and I'm surprised that it's still in preview, to be honest with you.
Yeah, it's a little bit disappointing, but should just be aware of that.
And you can see here's my start and stop schedule, so I can I screwed up because it's in universal time. So when I set the schedule to automatically start this morning, I picked coordinated UTC time.
That is a key. That is another key difference between. We had a customer pick managed instance over DB because of that. You can change the time zone of an MI.
Yeah, but that's only on create, I believe. Like you have to choose it when you create it. You can't do it after the fact, I think.
Okay.
You can change this, the schedule you can change, but the actual MI, you have to do it when you create it, I believe. But we can see that we have, if I had databases here, right, you would see that we have baked in platform as a service offering. We get backups managed for us, like Joey said. We can define retention policies. We can change this. We get 7 days out of the gate, just like we do with Azure SQL Database. We can configure long-term retention up to 10 years if we want, and those are the full backups. The schedule for the backups are just like Azure SQL Database, weekly full, 2 daily differentials if you want, and transaction log every 4 to 7 minutes, depending on what the workloads are doing. One of the things that we haven't mentioned is that with MI, you do have the ability to use like DB Mail. You can use SQL Agent, so you get access to the jobs and stuff, which we don't get with Azure SQL Database. We do get TDE, so TDE, which please make sure that all your databases have TDE, because you can turn this off through T-SQL.
That's actually an interesting observation. You may there are times for migrations where you may want to turn it off, but enable it.
Sure.
Go ahead and enable it after the fact.
Yeah, Good call. Yeah, for the migration, you can turn it off, but then once you're into the platform as a service, turn it back on.
Yeah.
Make sure you turn it back on. We can do private endpoints, so you can, as Joey mentioned, by default it's private anyways. But if you wanted to connect it to your other VNets and whatnot, or your express route to your on-premise environment, you can stand up private endpoints and ensure that all the routing goes internally to Microsoft's backbone.
Yeah.
What else do you want me to show?
I think that's about it. I think we have another episode we're going to do on this where we're going to go into a little more detail on how this all works. But I think that's good.
Cool.
Anything else you want to cover?
I don't think so.
All right. Well, thanks for joining us. Stay tuned for part 2. We'll do it. We're going to probably do 2 episodes on this, and I think probably 3 on SQL Database. SQL Database is a lot of stuff. There's a lot of variations of it.
Probably one of my favorite services.
Yeah, for sure. Like and subscribe. Join us next time, and have a great day. Enjoy your cloud.
See you next time.